It's lesson 3, part 3 of COMP2106. We've been playing around with NPM. So we've been using the HTTP library to make HTTP requests and send responses. We're going to look at using another package for this, because this lets us take in a request and send a response, but it doesn't let us go to different places or send different kinds of responses. So we're going to use a package for this, NPM package called connect. So connect is kind of a middleware. It lets us, it's kind of an alternative to using the HTTP library. We're going to use connect this week just to see the mechanics of how URLs get interpreted. And then we can send different types of responses based on the URL. After this week, we're going to use a different package called Express. But Express, under the hood, uses connect. So it's probably a good idea at a low level to use connect for today. And then when we introduce Express next week, it'll make a little more sense. So it's basically an API. So it's a middleware that's used for handling HTTP requests and determining what kind of response should be there. So it basically uses an object called a dispatcher. That dispatcher interprets our URL and then decides what response we want to send based on the URL request that comes in. So our code is also a little simpler than our previous version with the HTTP library. So what we're going to do, we're going to install the NPM, the package from NPM, and we'll use the ---- save option. And then we'll build a new file, a server.js, and we'll start it out simply this way, using connect to run our server, and then we'll make it a little more advanced. So I'm going to stop my server. And we're going to install connect. So I'll just use npm I connect with the ---- save option so that the dependency is tracked by package.json. npm I connect ---- save. So let's install that. When we install Express next week, it will download Connect, because Connect is one of the dependencies for Express. So it told us it downloaded 12 packages. We could have a look here on NPM for Connect. Obviously, this is one of the most popular packages on NPM. Almost 8 million downloads in the last month alone. So it requires these four packages, and some of those have their own dependencies. So our node modules folder is getting bigger. And because we use the ---- save option, Connect is now tracked in our package.json. So we're going to make one other change. We no longer want this to be our startup file. We want a new file we're going to make called server.js. That'll be our startup file. So when we load our server, it's going to run our server file instead. So I'll just save that change. And now we need to make server.js. So I'll make a new JavaScript file called server. And we're going to do this simplified version. So we'll link to Connect. We'll create an application, basically creating a new application using Connect, and then we just call app.listen. So 3 lines of code, our code is shorter. I should probably replace this stuff with let, all a little dated. running our server is a little simpler with Connect. Not sure what happened to my JavaScript version. I got to set it back to ES6. So now I should be able to use my terminal. I'll use the one within WebStorm. Thank you, Alex. And now I should just be able to run the node-mon command. Don't have to specify a file. It's going to load server.js. Now, right now, we should just get a blank screen here because we're not sending any sort of response. So I use node-mon. It kicks off server.js. And now I can just go to localhost 3000. So now we get this message. Our server's running, right? We didn't get that browser error saying it couldn't connect to the server. The server is live. So what do you suppose is happening here? Nope, we don't need app.js. Yeah, there's no response. We're taking in, it's handling the request to load localhost 3000, but we haven't set any direction as to what happens at this URL. So our server's running. We didn't bother with the console log. That's okay. So this is what we should get. So we haven't dealt with a GET request at localhost 3000. So the server doesn't know what's supposed to happen here. So just like we've used already, basically each function has three parameters: our REQ, the HTTP request, the response, and then this is a third parameter that's optional called next. And that is, if we want to then call another function afterwards, we can pass it in as to what should happen next. Maybe we want to take in the request, send a response to the browser, and send an email, for example. That sending an email would be a function that would be handled by that next. So what we want to do here is kind of add something like this. So we're going to add a callback function. When we get a request in, we're going to send a response, and we're going to call app.use. So that'll be handling our response. So let's try this. So we're creating an anonymous function. We actually saw this in our video last week. And we're assigning that function to a variable called index. So now we will map when the user goes to localhost 3000, call this function. So it should print out a response that says homepage. In fact, we could even wrap some HTML in here. And my server's restarting now. It's restarted successfully. I'm going to refresh my browser at localhost 3000, and it should now call this anonymous function, which we've assigned to a variable called index. So now we've told the browser what to do. Anytime a request comes in to our root. So localhost 3000 with no other information in the URL. So this is going to allow us to then map other routes. So we'll set up another function. If we think about, I'll kind of mirror what we got from Visual Studio when we set up a new ASP.NET MVC application, right? There were 3 pages that came. What 3 pages did we get when we built those applications that came with Visual Studio? We had 3 links in our nav bar and they all worked. So we had index. What else did we have? About, and what was the other one? Right, we had about and contact. So we can simulate. We don't need 3 physical pages here for about and contact. We're just going to use connect to send different responses at the root folder. The root folder will say homepage. The /about will have a title that says about, and /contact. So let's set up a second variable for about. Again, we'll end the response. Well, I'll save that. So we're setting up a response. Now, what do? We're going to need to do something. If the user goes to localhost 3000 /about, we want it to run this function instead of this one. So we need to add one more line of code to our file. What should that line be? So we've mapped this path to this function. That's what's happening here. So what would we do to map the path /about to our second function? Right, so in our app.use, we're going to map the path about to our about variable. So now we should be able to browse to localhost 3000 and get a heading that says homepage. We should also be able to go to localhost 3000 /about and get a heading that says about us. So these aren't real physical pages. We'll build physical views next week, but we're looking at how Connect does our dispatching, how it handles, it interprets a URL and then creates a response based on that URL. So NodeMon should have restarted. So my root folder loads the home page, my root path loads home. Ah, okay. Interesting. What's happening here? It's supposed to be loading our about, but it keeps loading the home, keeps running this function each time. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the priority here. This one is overriding this one because both URLs start, this one starts with a slash, it's running this one. But I actually need to move this one above. So the order of them makes a difference. So first it will look for about. There.
Next should always be like.
It should be last.
If we gonna make one like on access we can like or should be like after about or.
Good question. Well, right now when I go to contact, see what happens? Right? Takes me to home. So yeah, we want to write a contact function with the contact us heading. So where should that go? Where do we want to map it to the URL? Well, it could go before or after about, but it has to go before index, right? Index has got to be last. Otherwise, it will just load the home page every time. So I want you to write the contact function and then map the contact URL to your new contact function. So then we should have, in effect, 3 working URLs. Get to work, Raj?
Yep.
So where did you put the app.use statement? What line?
After about.
Okay.
Now I'll try before about.
It shouldn't matter. It's only about in contact doesn't really matter. But our default with no file name, that has to go at the end. Otherwise, it'll take priority over all our other paths. So if we save, now contact should take us to contact. About will take us here. And everything else will take us home. Our home's kind of like our default. If there's no path specified, we get the home page. And yes, we probably want a 404 handler. In this case, we'll deal with that a bit later, next week. Express has a built-in 404 handler we can use. So this is kind of where we'll be going with Express. We're not actually going to write responses like this. We will load actual views. This is the MVC framework. So each function is going to render, instead of using res.write. Actually, maybe we could probably try this. Let's see if we could try this. Let's see for a minute in the Connect documentation. Let's try this. I'm not entirely sure if it will work, But let's see if we could actually load an HTML file now rather than just sending a response. So in here, let's create a new HTML file. We'll call it index. My template's nice in WebStorm because it'll set up, I've got an HTML5 template, so it should create a properly formatted HTML5 document. All right. I'll just put on a generic message here. Now, I don't know if it will definitely work in Express. I'm not sure if in Connect we can render this file instead of just printing out a text response. We'll try it. Haven't tried it before with Connect. It's a bit of an experiment. So it doesn't really matter what content's on our page. We'll see. I'll comment that out. Looking for a render file method, which it doesn't seem to show. Let's see. Response.load. I really have no idea if this is going to work. We'll see. Okay, like that. We may not, with Connect, be able to load a specific HTML file. All right, so for now, we may just have to send that HTML-based response. I'll look in the documentation one more time to see if it's possible to do, but it doesn't really look like it. Yeah, they haven't really given us any sample of being able to load an actual HTML file. All right, it was worth a try. So we'll just undo here. We'll leave it there. So kind of the important part, like I said, we won't use Connect directly again. We're going to use Express. But the routing, the dispatching or interpreting of URLs in Express is similar to this. So for each URL, unlike in ASP.NET MVC, where those URLs are interpreted automatically, it looks at a particular controller and loads a particular method which calls a view. We manually, in our Node applications, we will have to map every URL and each type of request. So for example, if we have a /register or /login, we're going to have to handle two types of requests. What two types of requests might we have to handle at a URL that's /login? Well, we're going to have request and response in each case. Okay, well, I mean, we had them even in our .NET MVC, right? Let's look. So go here, pull up our music store. So here we've got two different types of HTTP requests being made at the same URL. So the URL is /account/login. What happens here? So if we have a GET request, what should happen? What does the user see in the browser when they make a GET request to account login? If I type this URL in my browser, what would I expect to see? Yeah, we want to see the blank login form with an empty text box for username and password. So that's what's happening here. What's happening here? Same URL, different HTTP method. What happens in this method? What's it doing? Yeah, it's posting. It's taking the login that I've submitted the form and checking in the database. Right? So we had to write two different methods at this URL, one for handling a GET, one for handling a POST. We're going to have to do the same thing here. So if we write a login URL, we can't just have one method. We're going to have to not only know what the URL is, we're going to have to know, is the request GET or POST, or put or delete. So for today, we've only handled GET. We're not working with forms. We don't have to worry about POST. But just thinking about where we're going with mapping the URLs, keep in mind, it won't only be GET requests we'll need to handle POST requests. And sometimes we'll have different types of requests at the same URL. So eventually our file ultimately is going to look something like this. Let's go back. In terms of our routing. Eventually, if we look at our routing and what it's going to look like, I'm just going to show you where we're going. We're going to get to about this. So we specify each path and then what we do. So here's a GET on our index. We're going to go and find all the data and make a list. We're going to get our add form that's going to load our new form. So we manually have to map all of the URLs and the type of request. So here's our GET, here's our POST at the same URL. So this is what our URL handling is going to look like in a few weeks once we've built out all these requests. But it's all based on what we've done here by mapping a URL to a particular function. And that function has all the logic of what should happen when that URL gets called. So I've put up a link just in preparation for next week's class. I'm going to strongly recommend, if you look at the week 4, the lesson 4 folder with Express, you may want to go, we'll have a look at this video in class next week. Just going to briefly show you the official Express site. It shows you how to install it with -save. And they've got a few simple examples, like a very basic hello world. It looks pretty similar to our Connect version. We've used this syntax instead, which we'll talk about next week. It's kind of a shortcut. Instead of writing the word function over and over again, They've kind of shortened the code for us, which is nice. And there's a few basic examples, how to do a hello world, mapping a GET request to send a response. So sort of similar to what we did today. So here's a basic kind of routing example. So if we have a GET request at the root, we send this response, a POST request. And then they have this cool tool that we're going to use that's kind of like generating a Visual Studio template. It's called the Express Generator. So first we'll kind of do Express low level where we hand code everything. And then like Visual Studio, there's this NPM package called the generator, which we'll install globally. And we can use it and it will scaffold out all of this stuff. It'll build an application and create a bunch of folders within MVC structure. We'll have a public folder with things like JavaScript, client-side JavaScript and images. We'll have our roots, which are controllers. We'll have a style sheet, and we'll have some default views. So we can build, and just like with Visual Studio, we can run this. We can start the application. We actually have a working website with a home page and a CSS without writing any code. We just run this command at the command window, and then we start customizing. So your lab next week will be building a simple site using the Express generator. So we'll do hand coding Express first. We'll do the Express generator second. And then we basically use the Express generator the rest of the semester. We won't use Connect again or the HTTP. We're going to use this because it builds out an application and we can just start working. So maybe you may want to poke around a little bit, have a look at this site before next week. Okay. The last thing I'm going to do today, I'm going to put this up on GitHub, and I'll also add, well, I could add it here. So I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to make a new repository for today, and I'm going to initialize it. I want to use the node gitignore, so I don't want all the node modules uploaded to GitHub. So right now, if I go and check my node modules, well, it's not too big right now, much smaller than ASP.NET, but there's still no need for me to upload this stuff. And it has a package restore just like Visual Studio. So if you upload your project, you can exclude the packages. When I download it, I just run an npm install and it will grab all the packages from package.json and install them. So I don't have to download them. You don't have to upload and download them. So I'm going to make a repository for today. So I'm going to choose node gitignore. I'll go to my terminal, stop my server. So I'll initialize Git. Now, normally I create an empty repository. This time I actually have a file up here. So what I need to do is connect the remote, and now I need to do a pull. I want to download the gitignore that GitHub generated. I'm just going to grab my URL here and copy it. Git remote add origin and paste that in. And now my local Git repository is connected to GitHub. I'm going to do a Git pull. Which didn't totally work. May have to git pull. Oops. Okay, so git pull origin master, that downloaded the gitignore. So that was git pull origin master. Now I should be able to commit my files and then push to GitHub. So I will add all my files with git add dot. I am recording this. I'll commit. I'll just call it lesson 3. Now I should be able to push. So all my files are here. So different from what we've done in the past, because I created the git ignore file first on GitHub. So running through my commands again, I initialized GitHub with git init. I added my remote with git remote add origin, and I copied and pasted the link to my GitHub repository. So that connects my local GitHub, my local Git repository, to my online one. And then before I did an add and commit, I ran the command git pull origin master. So it grabbed my git ignore file from the cloud, downloaded it to my local machine. And then I did my usual commands for uploading, which was git add dot, add all my files, git commit -m with a message, and then I could do a push. And notice my node modules are not here, which is what I wanted. I think last year I probably didn't have a git ignore file. Oh, I did. So we don't want all those node modules being uploaded to our repository. Okay. We can get out if you're a little bit early today. Okay. So please have a look at Express next week. We may also have we may do a little review quiz at the start of class next week, just on the stuff we've covered so far. Okay, just be worth a couple %.